break them into small molecules that our blood can then absorb in our intestine. Okay, so converting food into simple molecules. Starts in the mouth, where food is broken down mechanically by breaking into smaller pieces, but also chemically through enzymes in our saliva. From there, that food passes through the esophagus, muscular tube, which squeezes that food by peristalsis from the mouth into the next part of the digestive system, which is the stomach. The stomach contains hydrochloric acid as well as enzymes. Sort of mixes around this food that's being digested, allowing it to break down. Once it gets liquidy enough, it can then pass out of the stomach through into the small intestine. Okay, along the way, so as it moves through the small intestine, and this is a very long tube where food is both broken down and absorbed, where the nutrients from that food are absorbed into the bloodstream. Along the way, various organs add enzymes and various chemicals to that mixture. The liver produces bile, then sends it over to the gallbladder to be stored until it's needed for digestion. The pancreas releases pancreatic juices, a mixture of enzymes that are released into the small intestines to help with digestion. And they also have other functions, these organs. The liver also helps to break down poisons in the blood, filter the blood, and the pancreas, as we know, produces insulin as well, an endocrine gland. The insides of the small intestine have these villi, these projections that are filled with blood vessels, vastly increasing the surface area of the interior of the small intestine, allowing for the maximum absorption of nutrients. By the time the food is moved through this 25-foot long small intestine, basically all the valuable nutrients from that food have been absorbed. It's completely broken down into very simple chemicals, and all that's left is some undigestible material. Things that our body is not equipped to break down because we don't have the enzymes. So that undigested material moves through the large intestine, excess water is reabsorbed, and finally it leaves the body through the large intestine. That waste comes out through the colon, through the rectum. If we look at diagrams, again we have the esophagus, which leads to the stomach, leads to the small intestine, and then the large intestine. The organs that provide enzymes, the liver, underneath it, the gallbladder, and then the pancreas is sort of back behind the stomach. Okay, so that's the digestive system. And we went on to the excretory system, our body's means of getting rid of metabolic waste from our blood. Main organs are the kidneys, which filter, need a copy? Okay. Which filter all of our blood, goes through the kidneys, where they can then remove these waste products, turn it into urine, which is just a mixture of the waste products and water, and then send it down through the ureter, through these tubes, one leaving each kidney, into the urinary bladder, where that urine gets stored up so that it can eventually be eliminated. And then the opening of that urinary bladder leads to another tube which exits the body, that's called the urethra. So we have a kidney, and then a picture of both of them. So the kidneys basically, again, they work based on diffusion or osmosis, where waste materials diffuse out of the kidneys, are mixed with water and sent off, and then the filtered blood, the blood that is clean, without these toxins, can go back into circulation and provide, go on and carry nutrients and oxygen throughout the body.
Did you draw that?
No.
Come on, that is
You
not
know,
that
my
good.
drawings are much better than that. The skin and lungs are also considered excretory organs in that they sweat glands in our skin help remove some salts and waste from our body. Lungs allow us to remove carbon dioxide from our body. So these are also considered excretory organs. Okay, and this is where we left off. So our final body system to talk about is the respiratory system. And the respiratory system, there's some overlap because we just talked about it with excretory. But the respiratory system's purpose is to provide our body with oxygen that it needs for
Respiration.
cellular respiration. Let's just review again. I know we've done this many times. So the oxygen we absorb as we breathe in makes its way to our cells. Raise your hand and tell me, what organelle in our cells requires this oxygen? Which organelle in our cells needs oxygen? Shane? Mitochondria. The mitochondria are what actually need this oxygen. Because what takes place in the mitochondria? What process? Maya? Respiration, cellular respiration. Cellular respiration needs two things, two ingredients, two raw materials in order to work. What's one of them? Raise your hand, please. Megan? Glucose. And Donovan? Oxygen. So in the mitochondria, glucose and oxygen go through a chemical change and are transformed into three materials. What's one of those things that are produced by respiration? What's the important one? Yeah?
ATP.
ATP. ATP is what?
Energy.
Energy for the cell. What the cell actually runs on is ATP. And then it produces two waste products. Noreen? One. Yep, water, Caitlin, and carbon dioxide. And that's respiration. Glucose plus oxygen produces ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. And then all of our cells need constant supply of glucose and oxygen because they need energy to stay alive. So, we breathe in to get oxygen into our blood so it can be delivered to our cells for respiration. Respiration also removes what gas? Carbon dioxide from our blood. Okay? So, we breathe in and out by contracting and relaxing a muscle that's sort of tucked into our rib cage. You can see here in the rib cage, tucked inside of it, this is if it was taken out, this is the diaphragm. It's kind of shaped like a parachute. When this diaphragm contracts and gets smaller, okay, it creates a vacuum inside of our chest cavity. And that brings air into our lungs. When that diaphragm relaxes, bless you, then that forces the air out of our lungs. So your diaphragm is what allows you to breathe. It's under conscious control if you're thinking about it, like you are right now. If you're thinking about it, like you have to think, okay, I'm going to breathe in. But when you don't think about it, it's under unconscious control. You just sort of breathe in and out. You don't have to constantly think about it, but you can control your diaphragm if you choose to. It's also what spasms, when you get the hiccups, okay, is a convulsion of the diaphragm.
Is that annoying?
No, it just happens sometimes.
You don't think I'm like you're dying.
Yeah, I get the hiccups. Various things can cause hiccups. You have a nerve that goes down through, called the vagus nerve, that goes down through your neck and helps control your diaphragm. If it gets sort of irritated in some way, it can start to send those messages to your diaphragm, causing a hiccup. For me, whenever I like spicy food, but when I eat it, I get the hiccups all the time. And so it's those spicy foods sometimes irritate or lead to those spasms.
What is getting scared?
I don't think it actually does. People say that. I mean, there's all sorts,
It works.
teaspoon of sugar, drinking water upside down. I really don't think any of them work
Hold your
consistently.
breath.
All right. So if we look at our lungs, you see this is our respiratory system. Again, we have the tube. Our trachea is the windpipe that goes down through our throat. It splits off into two branches. One goes to the right lung, one goes to the left lung, and then those tubes continue to branch smaller and smaller and smaller. On the bottom you have the diaphragm. I forgot to tell you, if you don't want to look at the gross picture, that some people are squeamish, avoid this slide. But when we breathe, so, you know, when we say respiration, that can be confusing, because like we just talked about, respiration happens in your cells. But we also call breathing in and out respiration, so it can sometimes be confusing. It's actually better to call, you know, breathing when you inhale and exhale, and then sticking with respiration for what's taking place inside of the cell. So you can think of breathing as just getting air into your lungs and out, and respiration is what happens in the cells. When you breathe in, so the air in the atmosphere, the air in this room, is about 21% oxygen. It's mostly nitrogen. And then it has a very small level of carbon dioxide. So that's the air you inhale into your lungs. When you then exhale, the percentages have changed, because after you inhale that air, you add and you subtract things from that air. The air you exhale has about 16% oxygen, so you've used some of the oxygen, not all of it. In fact, you could breathe the same air in and out several times and still continue getting enough oxygen out of it. Nitrogen doesn't change. We don't absorb nitrogen in our lungs. Basically, it's inert. It doesn't react in any way. And then the air we exhale has much more carbon dioxide than it did going in, because again, we've added carbon dioxide to it. Okay? Yes, I know that numbers don't add up to 100. The numbers don't add up to 100. That's because technically carbon dioxide is much smaller than 1% there. It's like it's like 0.05% or something. It's just they're rounded numbers. Yeah, Mr. Arthur made a slide and he doesn't quite have the advanced knowledge of atmospherics that I do. But anyway, that's okay. Don't fault him for that. So as we breathe in, air comes into our respiratory system either through your nose or through your mouth. Now people always ask this, well, if you're choking on a piece of food, why don't you just breathe through your nose?
Because it all trachea either way.
Yeah, because they merge. Okay, they merge in the back of your mouth or back of your throat. Okay, if you look at this diagram, this is your nasal cavity, goes back, and your mouth is over here. But they merge in the back of your throat into one tube, and then they go down the trachea. So if the trachea is blocked, it doesn't matter if you're breathing through your nose or your mouth, still no way to get air into your lungs. So you can breathe through your mouth, you can breathe through your nose. Which is better?
Nose.
Why? What's better? It's actually nose. What's better about breathing through your nose? Maya?
Because there's some of the bacteria.
Yeah, because your nose has some built-in filtration. What's inside of your nose that's helpful? That?
Nose hairs.
Nose hairs, as well as
Mucus.
mucus. Both of those things are actually helpful, okay? Because they help to filter out little pollen from the air, dust particles, some small bacteria or other things get filtered when you breathe through your nose. Also, the air goes through sort of a more winding passage. It gets warmed up a little bit, allowing you to absorb oxygen more easily. So, yeah, nose is probably better because those little hairs and mucus act as a filter. Then that leads, your nose and your mouth lead in the back of your throat to trachea, a separate tube from your esophagus. They're sort of right next door to each other, but they're separate. And the trachea is reinforced with these rings of cartilage to make sure that it sort of stays open and it's pretty strong. Sometimes called your windpipe. Has a little flap on the top of it that closes when you swallow so that food doesn't accidentally go into your trachea. If food does go into your trachea, what is that called? Yeah, you're choking because you're having difficulty getting food or getting air into your lungs because it's blocked with something. or if you like drink some water and you inhale it by accident and you start coughing, okay, that's your body's adaptation to clearing out your trachea.
Is that what you say, like, when it went down the wrong pipe?
Well, kind of. I mean, that can happen. If you inhale water, it gets in your trachea, you start coughing. It's not supposed to go in your windpipe. It's supposed to go in your esophagus. Yeah, sometimes. Sebastian?
Is it like they got the wind knocked out of them? Like what?
That's what
Sometimes if you get hit real hard on the back or something, you fall, or even get hit in the stomach or the chest with like a soccer ball or something, your diaphragm can temporarily sort of be stunned and stop working for a few seconds. And so when that happens, you can't breathe in or out because your diaphragm is not working temporarily. And you can't really catch your breath, and it's scary because you feel like you can't breathe, but it goes away in just a few seconds. All right, so when your trachea splits, the two big branches, the main split, are called bronchi. Now this may be familiar. Why?
Bronchitis.
Bronchitis is an infection when those two tubes that split off from your trachea become infected and inflamed. And you might be coughing a lot, you may have difficulty breathing, because there's an infection there in those bronchi. As they continue to split, it's like the branch of a tree. Every time it splits, it gets smaller and smaller. Okay? And those are called bronchioles, these small tubes. And they end at what are called alveoli, these little pockets. These little pockets of air. This is where diffusion happens. This is where oxygen goes into our blood, where carbon dioxide leaves our blood, in these alveoli. If we look at these alveoli, they look like little clusters of sort of grapes, little broccoli sort of. Each one is a little bubble that inflates with air. And then surrounding each of these alveoli is a network of very small blood vessels called capillaries. So as we inflate these little bubbles of air with air from the outside, they fill up, the blood that's traveling around them through these capillaries, diffusion can happen. So carbon dioxide gas diffuses out of our blood cells into the air, and oxygen diffuses from this air that we just inhaled into the blood cells. Okay, so these gases diffuse into and out of our blood. So the blood coming into our lungs is low in oxygen, high in carbon dioxide. By the time it leaves, the opposite is true. It's high in oxygen, it's low in carbon dioxide, so it can then go back to our heart and be pumped throughout our body. Okay, so again, so blood comes in, gets oxygenated, and the carbon dioxide is removed. And you see another diagram here that's showing a horse where you have trachea, which leads to the lung, which splits smaller and smaller into these bubbles, these alveoli, which are surrounded